You gutted him like a fish in that apartment, too. You were relentless. You stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed until he was dead.
When we think about extremely dangerous people, we almost never imagine someone so young. The common idea is to link that kind of behavior to adults with a long history of problems. But reality in the United States shows something very different and, at the same time, disturbing.
God! God!
There are teenagers who committed acts so extreme they seem like scripts from dark movies. Young people who, even with little age, face the most severe consequence the judicial system can impose, spending the rest of life behind bars. Get ready to learn about cases that shook entire communities, caused intense debates in society, and left deep marks on everyone involved. In March 2024, one of those episodes gained national attention and placed the state of Mississippi under the spotlight. Carly Gregg, a teenager only 15 years old, became the center of one of the most impactful stories of that year. The girl was held responsible for the death of her own mother and for a serious attack against her stepfather. According to investigations, everything started after a family discussion, when her parents confronted Carly about the use of forbidden substances. What should have been a difficult but common conversation in many homes took an unimaginable turn. Dominated by anger and unable to deal with the pressure of that moment, Carly had access to an object her parents kept hidden inside the house. Inside the bedroom, she fired at her own mother, ending in a brutal way the life of the person who should protect her. Then, in a cold attempt to gain time, she used the victim's phone to send messages to her stepfather, pretending nothing had happened. When he returned home believing everything was normal, he was surprised by new shots. By a detail many consider a miracle, the man survived, managed to ask for help, and alerted the authorities, which led to the immediate arrest of the teenager. During the trial, the defense argued Carly had serious psychological disorders that had never been correctly diagnosed. Specialists were heard, reports were analyzed, and the courtroom filled with tension. Still, the jurors felt the evidence was clear and decided on an extremely severe sentence. When she heard she would spend the rest of her life deprived of freedom, with no possibility of review, Carly collapsed. Crying covered a face that until then seemed empty. It was the first visible sign of emotion since the process began, but for many, that moment came too late. Years earlier, in 2006, Texas was the scene of a crime that still causes chills. Dexter Johnson, still very young, took part in a kidnapping that ended in tragedy. Alongside others involved, he approached Maria Aparecida, age 23, and her boyfriend, a boy only 17, while the couple was inside a car. They were taken to a remote area, far from any help. What happened there was described in court as a real nightmare, leaving deep marks even on the most experienced investigators. After hours of suffering, the victims did not survive. Dexter's escape did not last long. Days later, police found him by tracking the use of a card belonging to the victims. Arrested, he maintained a cold posture during almost the entire trial, seeming not to understand the seriousness of what he had done. That attitude changed the moment the sentence was announced. When he heard he would face the maximum punishment allowed by law, his body simply gave out.
L. Johnson, the jury has found you guilty of capital murder. In accordance with the laws of the state of Texas, this court hereby assesses your punishment of death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is going to complete your jury service. I'm going to meet you in the jury room.
All rise.
His legs failed, his face lost color, and his emotional control disappeared completely. The collapse was so intense agents had to intervene, and the hearing ended interrupted. Later, a higher court temporarily suspended the execution, raising doubts about Dexter's intellectual capacity. Even so, he remains isolated, waiting for a decision that can change his destiny at any moment.
God! God!
There are situations when even before any word is spoken, the atmosphere already indicates something very serious happened. When a young person is taken to court with extreme containment measures, silence grows heavy in the air. That was exactly the scene involving Damon Kemp, accused of taking the life of two 19-year-old friends in an apartment in Florida. As soon as he entered the room, Damon began to scream desperately, as if fully aware his future was about to be destroyed. The screams were so intense that the judge had to interrupt the session repeatedly. Damon's behavior seemed completely out of control, giving the impression of a psychological collapse in front of everyone. Investigations pointed out that, in 2018, he entered the victim's apartment and fired several shots. A witness heard the noise, called the police, and that was crucial for the quick identification of the responsible person. Convicted for 2 serious crimes, Damon received multiple sentences that, in practice, meant spending his whole life incarcerated. He narrowly escaped the most extreme punishment. The reaction at the moment of sentencing was marked by tears, screams, and a heavy silence that filled the room. To this day, that episode is cited as one of the most intense reactions ever seen in an American courtroom. Another case that went beyond the limits of what is imaginable happened in Colorado, in 2013. Isabella Guzman was only 18 years old when she was accused of a brutal act against her own mother. The body was found inside the bathroom of the house, with many injuries concentrated on the face and neck. The scene was so shocking that even professionals used to dealing with extreme situations were deeply shaken. Isabella tried to run, but was later located in a parking lot. During interrogations, she repeatedly denied her identity, claiming to be another person and saying she did not recognize any member of her own family. In court, her behavior drew even more attention. Misplaced smiles, empty looks, and attitudes that reminded people of disturbing movies. Specialists stated she suffered from a severe psychological disorder, which led to intense debates about responsibility and punishment. Initially, Isabella received an extremely rigid sentence, but later was transferred to a specialized institution, where she remains isolated to this day. The case continues being discussed by experts and by the public, which is divided between justice, treatment, and society's safety. Not all cases involve final sentences, but some become marked by courtroom drama. A meeting arranged through an app ended in a tragic way when an 18-year-old girl, Andrea Cook, found herself in front of a judge asking for a second chance. Along with her boyfriend, she lured 2 people to an isolated place with the intent to commit a robbery. The plan slipped out of control, and one of the victims did not survive. During the hearing, Andrea cried, apologized to the affected family, and said she wanted to return to school and rebuild her life. Despite the emotional appeal, the judge understood she had active participation in the event and ordered a long prison sentence. The reaction was immediate: desperation, screams, and relatives in tears. Later, the sentence was reduced, but the impact of that day remains alive in the memory of those who watched it. Even without receiving a definitive punishment, the young woman's behavior and the mood inside the courtroom turned that episode into one of the most talked about in the country. These cases raise a troubling question: to what point do teenagers understand the real weight of their choices? In the United States, episodes involving youths in extreme situations keep appearing, many marked by an alarming absence of remorse. And among them, one of the names that caused the most shock was T.J. Lane, in 2012, a case that would take this discussion to an even more disturbing level. In a school in Ohio, early in the morning of a day that should have been ordinary, routine was broken in a brutal way. As classes were beginning, T.J. Lane opened fire against students inside the building. 6 youths were hit. 3 of them did not survive. Another would carry serious consequences for the rest of his life. Lane was only 17 years old, was a former student of that school, and knew some of the victims personally. Precisely because of the cold way he acted and the planning involved, justice decided something rare: he would be judged as an adult, completely ignoring his young age. The defense tried to argue that Lane had serious psychological disorders, but everything that happened in the courtroom ended up undermining that strategy. His attitude shocked even those already used to extreme cases. He appeared before the judge wearing a white shirt with a handwritten word exalting violence. At no moment did he show empathy or remorse. On the contrary, he kept a provocative posture, even laughed, and mocked the suffering caused. At a certain point, his actions were so offensive they caused immediate outrage in the room.
Saying pull the trigger to kill your son, memory.
Faced with that behavior, the jury did not hesitate. The sentence exceeded a century in prison, with no possibility of review. Lane remains isolated to this day, and everything indicates he will never return to life in society. For many, someone with that profile simply represents a permanent risk. Soon after, another case would spark outrage in New York. In 2014, Dylan Schumer, also 17 years old, was left responsible for caring for his girlfriend's young son while she worked. The baby was barely more than a year old. When the mother returned home, she found a scene impossible to forget. The child was no longer breathing. During the trial, Dylan appeared crying, with a swollen face and red eyes, repeatedly claiming that everything had been an accident. He said he never intended to hurt the boy. However, the medical reports completely dismantled that version. The autopsy revealed clear signs of repeated harm, marks on the body, and indications of suffocation. There was nothing accidental about it. The court made it clear that it would not accept weak excuses in the face of such strong evidence. The sentence was harsh and immediate: life in prison for the death of a defenseless child.
It is a judgment of this court that upon your conviction for the crime of murder in the second degree, that you be sentenced to an indeterminate term of imprisonment which will have a maximum of life. The court hereby imposes a minimum sentence of 25 years. The surcharge is $300, the crime victim's assistance fee is $25, and the $50 DNA databank fee, all to be paid out of prison funds.
After hearing the decision, Dylan still tried to explain himself, saying he only wanted the baby to stop crying. That statement, far from easing the situation, caused even more outrage. The question echoed in everyone's mind: how does someone lose control to that extent with a baby? And it was not only boys who were at the center of shocking stories. In 2022, in the state of Ohio, a case initially treated as a car accident turned into something far more serious. Mackenzie Sheila, age 17, was driving at extremely high speed when she violently crashed into a fixed structure. The impact was devastating. Her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and his best friend, Davion Flanagan, lost their lives instantly. Mackenzie was the only survivor. At first, everything seemed like a tragedy. But investigations revealed disturbing details. Security camera footage showed that instead of trying to avoid the collision, she accelerated deliberately in the final moments. The prosecution argued that the act was not impulsive, but planned. Witnesses indicated that the relationship between Mackenzie and Dominic was marked by constant conflict and earlier threats. When she was found guilty of intentional homicide, the young woman collapsed in the courtroom. She trembled, cried non-stop, and could barely speak.
Having had count one tried to pursuant to waiver, finds the defendant Mackenzie Sheila guilty of murder to win Dominic Russo in violation of Ohio Revised Code section 2903.02a.
The judge was direct when announcing the sentence: life in prison, with a possibility of review after 15 years. According to her, the act was calculated, cold, and caused irreparable destruction. Today, Mackenzie serves her sentence carrying the weight of having taken 2 lives and destroyed her own. Another name that came to symbolize the debate over youth violence was Ethan Crumbley. At just 15 in 2021, he took his father's firearm to school in Michigan and carried out an attack that left the country in shock. 4 students were killed and several others were hurt, including teachers. During the final hearing, the atmosphere was suffocating. Relatives of the victims described irreparable loss, lives interrupted, and an emptiness that would never be filled. Meanwhile, Ethan remained still. No tears, no visible reaction, no sign of regret. Just an empty, distant stare, almost disconnected from the reality around him. That lack of empathy weighed decisively in the judge's decision, who imposed the maximum penalty possible: life imprisonment with no chance of release. With that, Ethan became the first minor in Michigan to receive that type of sentence, a milestone that still fuels deep discussions about criminal responsibility, education, and prevention. Shortly before that, another case had left deep marks. Dante Wright was 17 when, together with 2 accomplices, he tried to rob a young man who was simply walking to school. The victim, Jordan Michael Klee, was 18 and offered no resistance. Even so, he was killed in a cold manner. In court, the scene was infuriating. Jordan's mother cried uncontrollably, describing how her life had been destroyed. Meanwhile, Dante smiled. It was not nervousness. It was a wide, unsettling smile, as if he were watching something ordinary. The judge made his astonishment clear. In years of career, he said he had rarely seen such indifference to someone else's pain.
23 years of approximately, ever not accepted a sentence agreement between the parties because it's bargained for, sentenced by the parties, but watching you sit there and smile and laugh and shake your head like this was no big deal I'm very tempted to just say, I'm not going to accept this sentence agreement. We'll go to trial, and if you're convicted of felony murder, you'll go to prison for the rest of your life. That means you'll die there.
Even with the obvious suffering in the room, Dante kept a mocking posture, as if everything were nothing more than a show. That image remained in everyone's memory, the cold smile at the exact moment when any minimally aware person should show remorse.
I'll be home soon, R.I.P. Keon, I love my family.
That's all you got to say.
Yes.
A phrase spoken by him at the end of the hearing would echo in a disturbing way, reinforcing the sense that for some, the gravity of their acts simply does not exist.